in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. So, this morning, as we recognize, as we celebrate Epiphany, we dive into the story of the star guiding the wise men, the Magi, to the baby Jesus. And so, as we do that, we're going to go through kind of a geek out, a bit of a scholarly journey through some of the details of the text. And so I'm going to ask you to bear with me as we do that, because we will come around and it will be worth it. And hopefully you will see, as we kind of round the corner toward home, some beautiful application for your life, your world, including kind of our broader world, this messy world in which we live. So that's where we're headed today. With that in mind, why don't you go ahead and pull these out? Remember these? Just kind of dust them off, blow the dust off if you need, and pull them out. Let's open up to Matthew chapter 2, okay? Matthew chapter 2, page 1497. We heard it just a little bit ago. We're going to really center on two particular details of the text today. One is that turn of phrase, Magi from the east. And then the other is Jerusalem. And we're going to see what we can learn from those words and statements. Okay, so 1497, Matthew chapter 2. So it says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, and they asked, "Where is one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Okay, yeah, so just the first three verses enough to kind of get us into that. There we kind of see the occurrence of Magi from the east and Jerusalem, right? So it's sort of interesting as we think about the characters of these Magi in the context of this story. Now, if you're reading through and you're kind of thinking about the detail of the text, I think we come into a problem in this translation, or seemingly a problem, because it says Magi from the east. And then they said, "We saw his star in the east," right? That's the way this translation renders it. If that's the case, wouldn't they be going to, like, India? Wouldn't they be headed east if they saw the star in the east? This kind of thing. So it looks kind of backwards, but see, a better translation and the flexibility of the language actually allows for, "We've seen his star at the place of its rising," right? Okay, so Magi. Who were the Magi? Who were they? Okay, so we also know them as wise men. We recognize they were kind of learned fellows. Okay, right? What else do we know about them? We kind of say they're kings, given the nature of the gifts that they bring, especially. So they've got some wealth attached to them. Yeah, so we know that. Anybody else? Any other? Scholars, yeah. Mystics, or astronomers, astrologers. They were studying the stars and the planetary alignments and all this kind of stuff. They were attentive to these kinds of things. So we know that much about the Magi. How many Magi? How many Magi were there? Wait, 3? We don't know. Hey, how about that? All right. The Bible doesn't say. That's maybe the best answer, right? The Bible doesn't tell us that. We assume 3 because there's 3 gifts that are named, right? There's also this handy-dandy hymn that we all love. And I'm not bashing the hymn. Don't get me wrong. I love the hymnody. But this particular hymn, I think, leads us in a very interesting direction. You know, we 3 kings of Orient are, bearing gifts, we traverse afar, right? So, number one, not necessarily 3 kings. As we'll see later, Orient, I don't know about all that, right? And then traverse afar, well, not necessarily as far as we think, right? All of that kind of interesting stuff. Where do you think, when you think of Orient, I mean, what countries in today's world come to mind? Like China, India, right? I mean, yeah, so you start to think in terms of like way out there and stuff. Yeah, not necessarily. Okay, now, a bit of a diversion, but similar kind of line of thinking. Where were the shepherds from? Who were they? You know? They were just ordinary people. They were near at hand. They were tending their flocks in the hill country in and around there. The shepherds, most likely, were Jews, were the people of Israel dwelling in the land, right? And so they were near at hand. They knew of the stories and everything. They were steeped in the traditions, the same ones that Jesus grew up with and everything like that. But what about the Magi? Who were they, and how can we go about doing that? So it says they're from the east. Now, again, our hymn leads us to say Orient, right? From the east. How do you begin to unpack that? Well, what does east mean? I mean, we are wild Westerners, according to New Yorkers, right? I mean, we're living in nowhere's land to the west of where everything is happening on the East Coast, right? We are, Easterners to places like where I grew up in Topeka, Kansas. And we have these curious things of like, we can have a place near us like West Dundee that's still in eastern Illinois. How does that work? So it all depends on the reference point of the person writing, of the person speaking, right? And so from the standpoint of a Christian in Rome, east would probably mean like Persia, right? But from the standpoint of a Christian living in the Holy Land, of a resident of the West Bank of Palestine, the east simply could mean the other side of the Jordan River, right? That's all east means, like east of there, right? So doesn't necessarily mean a long, long distance, but easterly of where they're at, of where the reference point is that Matthew's writing from and everything. How else can we discover about where the wise men are coming from and what the east means? And bear with me again, I said this seems like an insignificant detail, but we'll come around to more of the significance of it. All right, so here's the thing. Gold was mined in Arabia. Okay? Yeah? Frankincense and myrrh, they are harvested from trees that only grow in southern Arabia. So wealthy dwellers of the desert regions of Arabia would naturally have access to these resources. So not only because of the geography and the gifts do we kind of have this steering of not to the far Orient, but to the Arab world. But also, early church fathers would point us in this direction. Justin Martyr from 160 AD said 5 different times without explanation or without defending himself, just sort of matter-of-factly, things like the wise men from Arabia came to Bethlehem and worshiped the child and offered to him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. 5 different times. He just kind of spilled that out. Wise men from Arabia. Tertullian and Clement, other church fathers, also say the same thing. So interesting stuff. Get this same concept is supported by later scholarship. In the 1920s, there was a British scholar named E.F.F. Bishop who visited a particular tribe, a Bedouin tribe, right? And in Jordan. And here's the thing. The Muslim tribe bore this Arabic name, Al-Kokabani. Kokab in Arabic means planet. And so why did they have this name? This scholar asked. Their ancestors followed the planets, they said, and traveled west to Palestine to show honor to the great prophet Jesus when he was born. A Muslim Bedouin tribe in the 1920s professed to this reality as being part of their heritage. Whoa. Wait a second. Hold the phone, people. So what we're kind of coming to is that the wise men are not from China and India or some kind of thing like that. But we could say that these wise men or these Magi were Arabs. They were Gentiles. We could say they were Muslims before Muhammad, but we could say they were Muslims because from this region, and Muslim can be a regional term, and the thing is, we can think of them in terms of ancestors of the later prophet, right? Cut from the same cloth. So get that. Shepherds, Jewish shepherds, the lowest of the low on the social scale, and rich, wealthy Arab merchants, Muslims, Jews and Muslims, worshipped at the manger of Jesus. What? How wild is that, right? This is what Paul talks about. So Jesus adored in this way. He says this is a mystery. The mystery that through the gospel, the Gentiles, or we could say particularly the Arabs or the Muslims, are heirs together with Israel, members together of one body, sharers together of the promises in Christ Jesus. Whoa, wait a second. So, now, these Arabs, these wise and learned, wealthy men, they came to Jerusalem first. And we can't blame them for doing that. For those who weren't part of the story, they went to where they knew the action was going to be, right? Jerusalem, the seat of everything, the seat of power, where you would expect a king or a priest to arise, the place that was thought of as where heaven and earth met, where they kissed, where they embraced. The temple was the epicenter of God's activity on the planet. Jerusalem, the seat of everything, the place, the destination for pilgrimages, the place where people went to make atonement, to find forgiveness for their sins, the place where all the important people were doing all the important things. So the wise men went to Jerusalem. Now, there's an irony in the story. They came to Jerusalem and they met with Herod, who's the parody king, not really the king of the Jews, but they're seeking out the king of the Jews, having followed the star, right? And Herod plays it cool. He fakes it like Herod does, only to hide his later intentions with the whole thing. But they come to Jerusalem. And with this news of a new king, all of Jerusalem is greatly disturbed along with Herod. This is unsettling news, right? Okay, so that's enough there. Now let's go to Isaiah chapter 60, okay? Page 1155. Page 1155. There we go. The glory of Zion, the heading there. Zion being the Temple Mount, being that holy geographical setting, right? So here's the thing. Arise, shine, verse 1, for your light has come and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples, but the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look about you and assemble all of you and come to you. Your sons come from afar. Your daughters are carried on the arm. Then you will look and be radiant. Your heart will throb and swell with joy. The wealth on the seas will be brought to you, and the riches of the nations will come to you. Who is you in all this? Who's Isaiah speaking to? Yeah. Jesus, as Christians living in the 21st century and an earlier part of this tradition, we recognize that's talking about Jesus. And the gospel writers lead us to that conclusion. You know what was thought of when they heard this particular poem of Isaiah, when it was heard in Jesus' time and just before that? Jerusalem, you! To you all the peoples of the earth will flock from all sorts of different directions, and they'll come bearing their gifts to you. Jerusalem personified in this Isaiah's oracle, right? So, again, we're continuing to geek out. It's going to come together. Just keep bearing with me, right? Okay? So, they thought it was Jerusalem, but how can that be? See, it couldn't be true of Jerusalem because here's the thing. Let's keep going. Verse 10, let's skip down to there. Well, it can't be Jerusalem because foreigners will rebuild your walls. Verse 10, and their kings will serve you. Though in anger I struck you, in favor I'll show you compassion. Your gates will always stand open. They will never be shut day or night, so that peoples may bring you the wealth of the nations, their kings, led in triumphal procession, right? The gates of Jerusalem were not open day and night. There was not a feeling of safety and security as that would communicate in Jesus' day. There was a lot of political upheaval, a lot of violence during his time. And so gates wide open, people coming and going and bringing gifts from other nations, not happening, right? But let's back the truck up just a little bit. Let's look at this. See, Matthew and Luke, as they're telling their story of Jesus, they've selected Isaiah 60 with a mind towards some particular details. The glory of the Lord shining all around, right? All this kind of stuff. Let's look at verses 6 and 7. Herds of camels will cover your land, young camels of Midian and Ephah. All right, now first of all, this is supposed to be like an oracle of like good news of great joy for the people, and it's talking about like herds of camels covering the land. Like, to me, that's weird. Like, that doesn't sound like good news. Like, have you been around camels? They are not pleasant creatures. So like a lot of them in a confined space, like flocking to one place, like that's not good news. That's just really awkward, like a pile of camels, right? But it's good news to them. Herds of camels coming from Midian and Ephah, right? Where are Midian and Ephah? Tribal lands in northern Arabia. These wise men, these Magi, coming from Arabia, and all from Sheba will come, which is southern Arabia. Bearing what? Gold and incense, and proclaiming the praise of the Lord. Sounds an awful lot like what the Magi did at Jesus' place where they laid him, right? And then it goes on, verse 7, right? All Kedar's flocks will be gathered to you. If flocks are there, then who else is there? Shepherds, baby. We got the shepherds and the Magi showing up and offering their worship, being drawn to this central location. Yeah, see, Isaiah promised these special blessings, and it was well understood that these were for Jerusalem, but the gospel writers, Matthew and Luke, they co-opted, they took this writing of Isaiah, this word from Isaiah, and they said, hey, not talking about Jerusalem, not talking about this specific geographical location, we're talking about a child. We're talking about God in the flesh being born into our world. That's where the glory of the Lord shone round about, and shepherds and wise men were drawn to worship. Whoa. Consider that Jesus, he didn't come from Jerusalem, but he would later go to Jerusalem repeatedly for festivals, and he would end his life, his earthly life, in Jerusalem, being enthroned, not on a fancy throne of gold, but enthroned by being affixed to a Roman cross. That's where his glory was shown. That's where his majesty was shown in humility. Jesus, in his earthly life, the one greater than the temple, Jesus, who in the week before his death came into the temple and overthrew the tables of the money changers to declare God's judgment on the temple. To say, you have been replaced. You're no longer needed. Whoa. So where does this leave us all? See, all of a sudden, the things that are highly contentious things between all of Father Abraham's sons, the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians, all this like king of the hill game that's going on for the Holy Land, we as Christians bear a different perspective. It's no longer all about Jerusalem, but it's all about Jesus. It's no longer a geographically centralized thing, but it's diffuse, it's spread. Wherever his name is praised, it's not a city or a country, but it's the dwelling of his majesty. It's wherever his kingdom is coming. That's why Jesus said, true worshipers will worship me in spirit and in truth, right? We, as Christians, await for the coming of this Jesus who destroyed the temple of his body and raised it again in 3 days, and who promised to return, bringing a new temple, a new Jerusalem, descending down from heaven, and we await that heavenly Jerusalem. That's where our hope is found. And so we don't need to get caught up in that. We dare not get caught up in the game of shedding blood over a king of the hill game, over possession of the Holy Land, even as we recognize its importance in tradition and history. Even as we recognize this place as a wonderful place for pilgrimage and for learning and for reverence. We can learn an awful lot from these Arab Magi, because they came, and in seeing the star and its connection to Jesus, they bowed and they worshiped. They were overjoyed at the sight of it, and at the sight of the Christ child, they fell down and they gave him their gifts. They knew what's what. We who come into God's presence, into his gracious presence, who receive his body and blood, we can learn an awful lot from the Magi who traveled from the east to come to see Jesus. Maybe we can think, and see, I'm going to apply this song that I love from a Hasidic reggae artist, right? That's a real thing. Hasidic reggae, a guy named Matis Yahu, all right? He sings a song called Jerusalem. And I find this song incredibly meaningful as I apply it to Jesus. He sings, Jerusalem, if I forget you, fire not gonna come from my tongue. Jerusalem, if I forget you, let my right hand forget what it's supposed to do. Jesus, if I forget you, let your spirit depart from me, because apart from you, I can do nothing. Jesus, if I forget you, let my right hand forget what it's supposed to do. See, we can pursue and we can fervently pray for the peace that passes all understanding, peace that cannot be found through any other means, peace in our world through the Christ child, this peace that was experienced through the nativity of Jesus as Jews and Muslims bowed in reverence to this Christ child And we can pray for all these folks with renewed zeal and compassion because we worship a God who longs for all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. Let compassion and fervor flow from us. Let zeal for Jesus consume us. And all God's people said, amen.